Tonight's Committee of the Whole. I'll ask the clerk to call the roll.
Mr. Callahan?
Present.
Ms. Cramsey-Smith?
Present.
Ms. Kwiatek?
Present.
Ms. Laird?
Present.
Ms. Leone?
Present.
Ms. Wilhelm?
Present.
And Mr. Cologne.
Present. Thank you, Mr. Miller. So we get together tonight because in 2017, City Council adopted an ordinance requiring periodic ethics training for City Council members. I'd like to take this moment to again thank our State Ethics Commission and Executive Director Mary Fox for making this session possible to provide this important training. Tonight is going to go as follows. Attorney Fox will make the presentation to council, and then at the conclusion of her presentation, I'll open it up to council members for any comment or questions. Then I'll turn to Mayor Reynolds, who's with us this evening, other members of the administration and elected officials, if they have any comments or questions. And then before we adjourn, I'll open it up to public comment with our customary 5-minute time limit. Tonight's meeting, I remind everyone, this is for information purposes only. There is nothing to be voted on this evening. There's nothing to deliberate on. This will just be the training session for information from Attorney Fox to members of council. So that being said, I will turn it over to Mary Fox. Mary has been the Executive Director of the State Ethics Commission since April of 2022. Ms. Fox formerly served as Assistant Counsel to the Commission in both its legal and investigative divisions from 2007 to 2011. Prior to serving as the Commission's Executive Director, Attorney Fox was the Assistant Chief Counsel for Government Operations for the Pennsylvania Department of General Services. And I welcome you virtually to Bethlehem this evening.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's always nice to do these presentations in person. It's always preferable, but this worked out really nicely. My daughter had her first ever high school track meet this afternoon at 4 o'clock. So I got to go and be there and watch her run the mile. So thank you for accommodating me. And I'm thrilled to be here. Teaching is part of our mission at the State Ethics Commission, and it's something that I love to do. We teach all over the state. We travel all over the state to teach. We do as many as we can. And we also teach virtually, like I'm doing tonight for you. So I'm really excited to be here. I want this to be useful for you guys. I want the training, and I want us actually, when I say us, the State Ethics Commission, I want to be a resource for you guys. I think that that's really important. And so this is a pretty high level, basic review of the Ethics Act and some of the provisions. But I'm going to start this presentation out. I'm going to end the presentation out by saying to you, if you have questions, please call us. I can answer questions during the presentation or after, as long as they're general. But if you have a specific question that might apply to you, please call us. We have some great attorneys on staff that they field calls all the time from public officials, public employees, and members of the general public talking about the Ethics Act and its parameters. So we're here to help you. Don't be afraid of us, and hopefully this training here for you today is helpful as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Ethics Act, or as we like to call it, short guide on how to stay out of the newspapers and how to stay out of jail. All right. So I want to start out this training by doing a very unscientific survey. If we were all in the room together, I'd ask you to raise your hands. I think that Zoom has a thumbs up or a hand raise option, but if you're on camera and you want to raise your hand, or you're in the council chambers, raise your hand. Raise your hand if you always trust the government to do the right thing. All right, I can't see. I see some people smiling, kind of laughing. I tell you, if we were in person, I pretty much never get anybody raising their hands that question. All right, raise your hand if you never trust your government to do the right thing. All right, nobody that's too skeptical. Raise your hand if you usually trust your government to do the right thing. And so I'm going to raise my hand because that's how I feel. I see some hands going up. All right. So I want to break it to you. We are the government. And so we need to trust, we need to know what we're doing. We need to trust that what we're doing is right. And so here's some interesting statistics that I want to share with you guys. So, are you familiar with the Pew Research Center? So, a lot of people are, but if you're not, it is an organization that takes polls and surveys of the public about various topics. And one of the topics that they've been polling people on since 1958 is the issue of trust in government. And when they started doing it in 1958, they asked a question. It's part of it's like an election survey or something like that. And they asked people the same question that I asked you. Do you always or almost always trust your government to do the right thing? And when they first started polling people and asking that question in 1958, about 3/4 of the people polled said that they almost always trust their government to do the right thing. So do you think since 1958 that's gone up or it's gone down? And I see more smiles. It's gone down. The most recent statistics I could find were from a survey that was done in 2022 and asked that same question. Only about 1/4 of those surveyed said that they trust their government to almost always do the right thing. So you can see there's just been this pretty much massive erosion in trust in government. And in 2022, 68% of people that were surveyed said that they believe people who run for public office do so in order to primarily serve their own personal interests. And only 21% of those surveyed thought that the people that run for public office do it to serve their communities. So this is like a problem, right? People don't trust their government. And I really want to ask why. Why don't people trust their government? And it's because of some of the stories that I'm going to tell you about as I go through this PowerPoint today. So that leads me into the purpose of the State Ethics Commission. So we are a independent state agency. We're not under the governor. We're not under the General Assembly. We're independent. And we have a commission of 7. There's 7 commissioners. 3 of them are appointed by the governor, 2 by the House, 2 by the Senate. And there's the ones by the House are of opposite political parties, same with the Senate. The ones appointed by the governor, only 2 can be of the same political party. So we're really a nonpartisan commission. Our purpose and our core mission and our guiding principle is set forth right in our law. And it is that public office is a public trust. And so we go back to that issue of trust that I've been talking about. And any effort to realize personal financial gain through one's public office is a violation of that trust. And so I talked about trust. Another term I really want to talk about here and point out to you is the issue of personal financial gain. Because in order for the State Ethics Commission to be involved in anything that you do, there has to be an element or a shading or something having to do with personal financial gain. So as I go through this, kind of pay attention to that theme because you'll see it over and over again. All right. So who do we have jurisdiction over? I want to tell you, I usually actually start out this presentation by telling you what my three goals are, and I forgot to do it. My first goal is that you know who we are and what we do, and that the Ethics Act exists. My second goal is to tell you some stories about what not to do, talk through some of our most frequently violated provisions so you can issue SPOT in your day-to-day work. And my third goal is that if you run into a problem, you know what to do about it. So those are my 3 goals for today. But sorry, going back to this slide. So who is subject to our jurisdiction? And there's really 2 big buckets of folks that are going to be subject to the State Ethics Commission's jurisdiction and the laws that we enforce. So the first bucket is public officials. And these are going to be people who are elected by the public, or they're appointed by an elected official. So for example, it's probably going to be your city council folks if they're elected. Other common, examples is the governor. He's a public official. All the members of the General Assembly, all the township supervisors across the state of Pennsylvania, all the way down to the tiniest borough in the state of Pennsylvania. If those folks are elected, they're going to fall within this definition. There's other people that fall within this definition. At the state level, there's all the secretaries under the governor. They're going to fall under this definition. So that's the first bucket of folks that are covered. The other one is our public employees. And these are people who are employed by the Commonwealth or a political subdivision who are responsible for taking or recommending official action of a non-ministerial nature with regard to, and then there's these 5 bullets. The way I like to think about this is these are people who can have an impact on money, on how it's spent, or some type of a financial impact on somebody else. And so we have looked at many people's position descriptions and positions to determine whether they fall within this definition. If you think that you or somebody within the city is a public employee, and you want to talk about it, call us, because odds are really good that we've already taken a look at their position or something similar, and we can let you know if they're going to be subject to the law or not. But generally, if somebody has the authority to impact somebody else financially, they're generally going to be falling under this definition. They're going to be subject to the law. So it doesn't matter if you're a public official or a public employee. If you fall within one of these definitions, you're going to be subject to the law. So there's a couple other people who we sort of have jurisdiction over. So solicitors, for example, who serve like in a more of a consulting role, like your city solicitors, folks who aren't necessarily an employee of a political subdivision or governmental body, but they are solicitors. We have some jurisdiction over them with regard to filing statements of financial interest. And then we also have 2 sections that apply to persons, which means everybody under the sun. And I'm going to tell you about those later. But for the most part, we're talking about public officials and public employees. All right, so we have 3 primary functions. First primary function is we do investigations when people mess up. And we have some great cases that I want to tell you about. I'm going to tell you about some of my favorite cases that the commission has ever handled, so you can see what not to do and you can see what kind of happens when people violate the law. The second primary function is we issue advice and opinions. And when I get to those slides to tell you about it, I'm going to tell you that these are the most important slides in my slide deck, because I want you to know that you have the ability to get complete legal coverage for your actions. It's a really valuable free tool that's available to you. And so I want you to pay attention when we get to that point. And then our third primary function is the statements of financial interest filing, which you should all be familiar with. And if you haven't filed, they are due May 1st. All right, so I'm going to talk about our restricted activities first. And these are the things that you are not allowed to do. And they are all contained within 1103 of our law. There's a whole bunch of them, but I'm just going to hit on some of the most frequently violated ones so you can see what they look like. But before we do that, I just want to tell you what a conflict of interest and an ethics violation is not, because I think people have all kinds of ideas about what ethics are and aren't. And I don't know that there's a consistent understanding in the world about ethical behavior. And so we get phone calls and complaints in. We get about 400 complaints every year. People write in and they're upset over all kinds of things. Like, for example, I recently got a complaint in about an inmate who was unhappy about the amount of telephone time that they got in the prison. I also had, I've had complaints about somebody that's an employee of a political subdivision who's having an extramarital affair. Those things, while they might be bad, really bad, and under the general understanding of ethics, might not be ethical. Like I said a few slides back, there's no element of a personal financial gain to somebody. And so that's not going to fall within our jurisdiction. So I say this because we are very limited in what we're able to look at. And not everything that's bad out in the world will fall within our jurisdiction and be something we can investigate. All right. So the number one violation of the Ethics Act that we see is a violation of the conflict of interest provision, which is 1103A. I would say 95% of our cases that we investigate involve a violation of this provision. And it's really pretty simple. If you open up the Ethics Act and you read it, 1103A says, no public official or public employee shall engage in conduct that constitutes a conflict of interest. Super simple, doesn't tell you a whole lot. So you have to go to the definition of conflict of interest. And here's what it is. It's somebody who uses, it's when a public official or public employee use the authority of their office. And that means anything that they can do because of their public office or public employment. So if everybody out in the world can do it too, it's not going to be use of authority of office. It's something that's special because of the position that they're in, that they can do because of the position that they're in. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. But it also can be confidential information that you have access to because of your public office or your public employment. So that's the first prong. The second prong is for the private pecuniary benefit. And here we are talking about money again. And it has to be for themselves, a member of their immediate family, or a business with which they or a member of their immediate family are associated. And that third box there, that's defined those terms are defined even further under the Ethics Act. For example, an immediate family member is defined as a parent, spouse, child, brother, or sister, and that is all. So if somebody gives a contract to their niece's business, it's not going to be a conflict of interest because that niece is not an immediate family member, and therefore it's not something we're able to look into. So keep that in mind. The commission's investigative division, we've tried to stretch that on occasion. At one point, we tried to extend immediate family member to a son-in-law. There was a public official who took action to financially benefit a son-in-law, and it went up to the appellate courts, and they said, nope, son-in-laws are not one of the immediate family members enumerated in the law, and it cannot, that action can't form the basis for a conflict of interest. All right, so those first three boxes are the three prongs. The fourth box says profit. And I put this here because I want to make a point, and I want to just mention that there has to be money or avoidance of having to pay money. So there's been cases involving individuals who use their office for political goodwill, where it's really kind of hard to quantify what they're receiving. And the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, there was a criminal case involving a legislator who was using his office to get additional space for his constituents, so they had more access to him. And he was criminally charged under the Ethics Act, and the Supreme Court said what he received was political goodwill. It wasn't actually money in his pocket, and therefore it was not a private pecuniary gain that could sustain a violation of a conflict of interest provision under the Ethics Act. So we have to have some kind of money in hand. Like every law, there's exceptions, and the definition of conflict of interest has two major exceptions. The first is actions having a de minimis economic impact. Those aren't going to be conflicts of interest. And so there's no magic number. I actually just had a call today from somebody asking me, well, what's de minimis mean? And my answer to you is I don't really know, because it really depends upon the facts of a particular situation. So the commission has, they've ruled that somewhere between $500, $700 can be considered de minimis, but there is no magic number. And I expect with inflation and everything else that number might be moving. If you're accepting something or you're taking action and somebody's getting a few $100s, I'd be very wary of that action. And you might want to consider abstaining if you're looking at that number, if you're looking into the hundreds of dollars. But there isn't a magic number, but this does exist. I think the legislature probably wanted to recognize that we don't have the manpower to investigate everything, and so it needed to be sufficient, a sufficient gain. The other exceptions is if you take action that accepts to the same degree a class consisting of the public or a subclass consisting of the industry or other occupational group. And what this means is that if you in your position have to take action, and it's going to benefit you, but it's also going to benefit your next door neighbor and the next door neighbor over, it's going to benefit you all in the same way, the legislature said that's not going to be a conflict of interest. And so the way I like to think about this is that, people run for public office and they serve their communities, and they live in those communities. And so sometimes they also are going to benefit from some of the actions that are taken. And with that recognition, if you're benefiting the same as everybody else, you're not going to have a conflict of interest under the Ethics Act. So if you have questions about whether an action you're thinking of taking might fall within either of these exceptions, give us a call and we'll talk through it with you, and we can help you work through that. All right. So I'm going to tell you an interesting story about some recent Ethics Commission cases that some of you may know about, and you may have seen in the newspaper. And these cases, I want to tell you, I'm really telling you these. All of this information is public. But I am simplifying these significantly, or else we'll be here until midnight. So I'm really going to simplify this as I tell you this story. But I want to know first, do I have any bourbon drinkers in the audience? If I do, raise your hand. I usually have one, at least one. Okay. Have any of you ever entered the lotteries that are done by the Pennsylvania Liquor Control Board to get bourbon or some other type of desired whiskey? All right. I will tell you that I usually have somebody in the audience that has. If you have and you haven't told me, you probably know more about the process than I do. I'm not a bourbon drinker. My husband is, but we've never entered the lotteries. So just to give you a little bit of background, as you know, the Pennsylvania Liquor Control Board, they have the exclusive jurisdiction in Pennsylvania over the purchase and sale of liquor. And so they're because the only people that are permitted to buy and sell bottles of liquor pretty much in Pennsylvania is the Liquor Control Board. There is no black market for liquor in Pennsylvania. So nobody would ever be able to buy a bottle of liquor and then resell it for more money, because that would be against the law. All right, so set the stage. So every so often, the Liquor Control Board gets their hands on a limited number of very highly desired types of alcohol. And for purposes of this story, I'm just going to talk about the type of bourbon called Pappy Van Winkle. And there's actually a bunch of different kinds of Pappy Van Winkle, but let's just say Pappy Van Winkle to make it simple. And let's say that the retail price of Pappy Van Winkle is $400. All right, so they got their hands on a limited number of these Pappy Van Winkle bottles. And so they wanted to make it fair for people to be able to go and purchase a bottle. And so they batted around some ideas, and they decided that they would implement a lottery system. So what you could do is, if you wanted your bottle of Pappy Van Winkle, you could go onto the website and enter your information, and then they would do the drawing. And if your name was drawn, then that gave you the right to purchase your Pappy Van Winkle for $400, right? It makes it fair for everybody to get this liquor. So they would run the lottery, and after they would complete the lottery, they would do a second lottery, because they would always have a few extra bottles. They would buy extra because of spoilage, or some people, they'd win the lottery and then they wouldn't come and get their bottle of Pappy Van Winkle. And so they always had some extras. And so they'd run a second lottery, and somebody eventually said, you know what, this is a lot of work. We don't really want to do this. And so the next time they did the lottery, they did the first round of the lottery. And when they had some left over, rather than putting it out for a second lottery, they called their friends at the Liquor Control Board and said, hey, we have some leftover Pappy Van Winkle bottles. Do you want to come down to our administrative offices and buy it? And by the way, you have to pay out of pocket for $400. So those were the sort of the general facts of the cases that we looked at. My question to you guys is, do you think that that was a violation of the conflict of interest provision under the Ethics Act? All right, I can't see anybody. So I'm going to tell you that the Commission's investigative division thought that yes, it was. And so they conducted an investigation into this. And they ultimately ended up settling all of these cases for no violation of the conflict of interest provision, because there were some good arguments raised that because these folks purchased the liquor for $400 and there is no black market in the state of Pennsylvania, there's no ability to resell, and there was no private pecuniary benefit, no Ethics Act violation. And so I wanted to tell you this story because I think it's interesting. And we always have people who participate. We sometimes have people who participated and won the lotteries But what ended up happening as a result of these cases is that orders from the commission ended up being public. They were posted on our website, and they did get quite a bit of press. And as a result, the Liquor Control Board did change their policies to make it make it so that these employees and officials at the Liquor Control Board couldn't purchase kind of these behind the scenes bottles. But I've had some pretty upset people at some of these trainings about they got into the lottery and they didn't win. But these are interesting cases that I like to talk about. All right, moving along. I have a tricky question for you. When can a family member work at the same governmental entity as another family member? And this is a trick question. And the answer is that the Ethics Act does not prohibit family members from working together at the same governmental entity. So the Ethics Act does allow governmental bodies to create their own policies that can be stricter than the Ethics Act. So I do know, and I've heard of some other cities who have nepotism policies that say that, they can't have one family member reporting to another, which is fine. That's allowed under the Ethics Act. But the Ethics Act does not prohibit two immediate family members working at the same governmental entity. What it does prohibit, however, is from one public official or public employee taking action to financially benefit their immediate family member who might work there. So, for example, if you're a public official, you can't hire your kid to work at your public body. You can't vote to give them a raise unless it's going to fall within the subclass exception and everybody's getting the raise. You can't vote to give them benefits that other people aren't eligible for. So really, when there are issues of nepotism, they can get kind of sticky, kind of quick. So I think it's advisable when you have a situation where family members work together at the same governmental entity, position to potentially financially benefit the other, that you maybe seek advice from us or from your solicitor so you make sure that you don't run afoul of these provisions, because we see a lot of cases like this. We had one pretty recently. It was an individual. He was a public official. He was a township supervisor, and their township had a nepotism policy that prohibited immediate family members from working at the same township. And he wanted to get that nepotism policy removed so that he could vote or he could get his son hired at the township. And so he knew he wasn't permitted to vote to get rid of that nepotism policy. So instead, he went behind the scenes and lobbied his other township supervisors to vote it down to get rid of the nepotism policy. And when it came to the meeting, it came up for vote at the meeting, the other township supervisors voted to get rid of the nepotism policy. And our township supervisor said, nope, got a conflict of interest, I can't vote. So they got rid of the policy. The motion passed. They got rid of the nepotism policy. The son got hired at the township. It came to us on a complaint. We did an investigation, and the commission found that he had violated the Ethics Act when he worked behind the scenes to lobby for that nepotism policy to be removed so his son could get hired. In this case, actually, it had a really complicated appellate path. It went up to Commonwealth Court, then it went to the Supreme Court, back to the Commonwealth Court, and ultimately the Supreme Court said that use of office is more than just voting at a public meeting. It can be doing things like lobbying behind the scenes to get what you want. So keep that in mind. All right. Two other really kind of big issues that we see a lot of cases about are use of government assets, and then issues involving gifts, transportation, lodging, and hospitality. So I want to talk first about use of government assets. So if you are thinking that you might want to borrow the city's backhoe to do work at your house, or if you think maybe the city has a computer program that they paid for that might really help out your private business, I urge you to think twice and don't do that. We see a lot of cases where people are doing things like using equipment for like construction work at their houses. We had a recent case where we had a employee of a state agency who in his private, he was a surveyor at the state agency. In his private capacity, he had a private surveying business, and it was PennDOT, and PennDOT bought this IT program and equipment to do surveying. And this particular employee, he borrowed it all the time to run his private surveying business on the side. Now, we could never find that he did any of his private work while he was on state time. He did it all at night and on weekends. But he made quite a lot of money using the PennDOT survey equipment. And we investigated that case, and we ended up settling it. And he's required to pay back $62,000. So it was a pretty significant case. But please do not use your government assets for your personal use. Another type of cases we see a lot is when people are doing their private employment while they're being paid by the public. So we've had cases in the past where people were running real estate businesses while they were working for the state during their state work hours. And so that's a big no-no. Just don't do this. The other types of cases we see quite a bit involve gifts, travel, lodging, and hospitality. And I want to mention to you that the Ethics Act doesn't prohibit you guys from accepting gifts, travel, lodging, and hospitality. You're allowed to accept it with some very big caveats. First, if it hits the disclosure thresholds, you have to list it on your statement of financial interest. So you'll have to do that. But when it becomes a problem is when people who are public officials, public employees, are receiving these things and they start to take action or inaction as a result of receiving gifts, travel, lodging, or hospitality. And I'm going to move on, and I'm going to tell you about my number one favorite case ever from the State Ethics Commission. But I'm going to start out by asking you guys, has anybody ever heard of or been to the Kinzua Bridge? It's in Pennsylvania. I see somebody nodding. It is it's a beautiful bridge in McKean County, Pennsylvania. I'm actually from Elk County. I grew up in Elk County, which is pretty close to where this bridge is located. And when I was a kid, we used to go picnic there. We would walk across the top of the bridge there, and then we would hike through the valley back up. And it was really cool. And it was also really scary, especially as a kid. But it was, at one point, was considered one of the 8 engineering marvels of the world. And it was a railroad bridge. And so the story starts that it was sometime in the 1990s that people had concerns about the structural integrity of the bridge. It wasn't looking like it was sturdy. No trains were going across it at that point, as far as I know, but people were walking across it. And so they wanted to make sure that it was structurally sound. And so the state agency, the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, DCNR, was in charge of basically shoring up this bridge to make sure that it was structurally sound. And if there's any engineers that are in this audience, I'm going to ask for you to forgive me if I botch any of this engineering lingo or whatever. I'm just telling the story as a lawyer, so cut me some slack with regard to that. So they were doing a whole lot of different things to strengthen this bridge, but one of the things they were doing was they decided that they wanted to put an epoxy coating over some of the rusted areas of the bridge. They thought that would help strengthen the bridge. It wasn't the only thing that they were doing, but it was something that was going to help strengthen it. And so there was one gentleman who was in charge from DCNR. He was a public employee under the law, and he was in charge with making sure that these bridge repairs were done appropriately. So he went out and he selected this type of epoxy. And the epoxy was manufactured in England. And so they bought all the epoxy and they started to apply the epoxy. And there was a problem with the way that it was adhering to the bridge. And the workers kept saying, hey, this isn't going on right. This isn't working right. And he kind of ignored it. Well, he totally ignored it. And right around that time that he was ignoring it, he got offered from this epoxy company an all expenses paid trip to England, ostensibly to tour the factory where the epoxy was made. But he went to England with his family, and do you think he toured the factory? No, he didn't. He did a little bit of sightseeing, maybe a little bit of golf, enjoyed England. And while he was over in England, and while he was ignoring the application of the epoxy, a tornado came through the valley and it knocked down the bridge. And this next picture is what it looks like today. So it knocked down a good significant part of that bridge. I don't think that the epoxy if he had done anything with that epoxy application, that it would have prevented this bridge from falling. But he did turn a blind eye, and he did it in reliance on the receipt of travel, lodging, and hospitality. So while the Ethics Act allows you to accept those things, when you start taking action or inaction based upon your receipt of them, then you have an ethics problem. And so we received a complaint, we conducted an investigation, found that he had violated the conflict of interest provision when he didn't do what he was supposed to do with regard to this epoxy because he was receiving this trip. And he ended up having to pay some money back. This is what it looks like today. The rest of the bridge that's still standing is structurally sound, and there's a really cool viewing area at the end there with a glass floor that you can look right down into the valley. And if you've never, I know you guys are on the other side of the state, but if you ever happen to be in northwestern Pennsylvania, this is a very cool sight to see. It's a state park now, but I love to tell this story because it's just, it highlights, don't accept a trip and then take inaction or take action because you're receiving that benefit. Okay. So what if you're doing your work for the city and something comes up and you think you're going to have a conflict of interest under the Ethics Act? What do? It's so simple. All you do is you abstain. And when I say abstain, it doesn't mean that when the vote comes around, you just say, no, I can't do anything about this, but you're doing all this behind the scenes work to get what you want. It means completely abstain from everything having to do with that particular matter. If it comes to voting, there's a few additional requirements that you should be doing. So you should still be abstaining, but you should also publicly announce and disclose the nature of your interest in a written memo with the person recording the meeting minutes. And that memo is required by law, but it also does something else. It protects you. So I can't tell you how many times we've done investigations where the meeting minutes from a meeting were not clear whether somebody with a conflict of interest abstained or not. It's either they just weren't recorded correctly, or when the meeting minutes were approved at the subsequent meeting, nobody looked at them. It was just a rubber stamp. Please follow this, do this. I don't want to see you guys anywhere else except for at this training. So abstain from everything having to do with it. But if it comes to voting, publicly announce and disclose, and then file that written memo to protect yourself and also to comply with the law. All right. So that's all I have about conflict of interest. Now, remember at the beginning when I talked about there's a provision of the law, two provisions of the law that apply to persons. And that's our improper influence sections. It's 1103B and 1103C. And basically it's quid pro quo. If I give you this, then you'll do this. It's I scratch your back, you'll scratch my back. These cases are kind of like a bribery charge. We recently had some interesting cases involving these provisions. These were in Western Pennsylvania as well. On the one hand, we had a school superintendent for a district who had a kid that needed a teaching job. And on the other hand, we had a board member for a different school district whose kid needed a teaching job. And so the superintendent and the board member got together behind the scenes and said, hey, you hire my kid, I'll hire your kid. Both of those kids got hired. There was some question as to whether one of them was even eligible for the position. And they also violated the hiring procedures that were within their districts. This came to our attention. We conducted an investigation and we ended up settling these cases. The school district, the school board member and the superintendent both admitted to violating these improper influence provisions where I'm going to do this for you, and in exchange, you're going to do this for me. So don't do that. All right. Honorarium is a section that people don't know a lot about, but I want to just mention it. So honorarium, here's an example. Essentially, you're not supposed to get paid twice for the work that you do for the government. So if you guys had reached out to me and said, Mary, we would really like for you to train us about your work as the executive director at the Ethics Commission. And oh, by the way, we're going to give you a $500 payment for doing it. I cannot accept that, because if I accepted it, I would be violating the honorarium provision of the Ethics Act. Basically, I'm already getting paid by the taxpayers to do my job. I shouldn't be getting to benefit twice by doing these public works or appearances. However, if you guys loved bird watching, and I was a bird watching expert, and you called me and said, hey, Mary, will you come and speak on bird watching to the city of Bethlehem? And oh, by the way, we'll pay you $500. I could accept it because it wouldn't have anything to do with my public position. So keep that in mind if you're being asked to do speeches or public appearances, or maybe even write books. And it's about the work that you do at the government. Reach out to us and talk through that with us, because I don't want to see you guys run afoul of this provision of the Ethics Act, because you maybe don't even know that it's prohibited. So reach out to us if you have any questions. And like I said, this is more than just speeches. It can be things like publications and things like that. All right. And then the last section I want to tell you about what you shouldn't do is the revolving door provision. And this only kicks in when you leave your public employment or public office. It says no former public official or public employee shall represent a person for promised or actual compensation before their governmental body for 1 year after leaving. So when I leave the State Ethics Commission, if I ever leave to take another job, I can't come back and represent somebody else before the State Ethics Commission, because I would run afoul of this provision. I think what this is intending to prohibit is some sort of special treatment because of who you know and who you used to work with at your governmental body. We get a lot of questions about this when we have a change of administration at the state level, where people, they want to know what they're allowed to do or not allowed to do when they leave the administration. But just keep this in mind. You can't have like a personal appearance before your former governmental body for that year after you leave. Okay, so those are all the things that you're not allowed to do that I wanted to cover today. I said at the beginning, I'm going to say when I'm at the point where this is the most important part of my presentation. So here we are. I want to tell you about the opportunity to seek legal advice or seek a legal opinion from the State Ethics Commission. So first, I want to tell you that this is available to anybody that's a public employee or public official in Pennsylvania. It is free, and it takes about a month. So you have to plan ahead if it's something that you want. So what is it? So the commission, in our law, the State Ethics Commission says that the commission can provide guidance to people who are public officials, public employees, about their duties under the Ethics Act. And so it takes the form of advices and opinions. And advice is issued by our chief counsel. An opinion is issued by our commission as a whole. Issues that are maybe have a bigger reach or maybe are new issues, our chief counsel will elevate that to the commission to make a decision. That's why it's called an opinion. So how does it work? So if you have a question about your activity, or you want to do something and you have a concern that it might be an Ethics Act issue, you can write into us and you can lay out all the facts of your situation. And in about a month, our chief counsel will issue you an advice telling you what you can and can't do. As long as you have given the accurate facts and the complete facts, and as long as you rely on the advice that's given to you, you cannot be prosecuted for an ethics violation if you rely on that. So it gives you legal clearance. These can be really helpful, especially in situations where maybe it's a hot topic in your local municipality. And there might be some criticism about your activity. You can write in and ask for an advice and have that in hand if you're ever questioned about whatever action that you're taking. The other thing that you can do is write in and ask for it to be confidential. So say you want to know about what you can and can't do. You'll just say, I'd like this to be confidential, and you'll actually get issued two. You'll get one that's unredacted, and you'll get one that's redacted. So nobody knows who it's about, and only the redacted version will get posted to our website. So you can ask for your advice confidentially. There's a couple caveats about it. You cannot ask for an advice about somebody else's behavior. You can authorize a solicitor to ask on your behalf. There's a few exceptions, really, really limited exceptions about somebody asking for an advice on behalf of somebody else. But you can't be angry at your other council member and write in and ask the commission if what that person is doing is okay. They'll just kick it. They won't even answer it. But so you can only really ask about your own behavior. There's also one other very big caveat to requesting advice. They have to be prospective in nature. So you can't, vote at a public meeting to hire your kid at the city and then write into the State Ethics Commission and say, hey, last week at the meeting, I voted in the public meeting to hire my child. Was that okay? Because that is not a request for an advice. That is a confession, and we're looking at a whole different process. So make sure that you're thinking ahead when it comes to these. Please use this. I think we issued about 80 of these last year across the state. I think it's a hugely underutilized tool that can be super valuable to public officials and public employees. All right, so I want to tell you a little bit about our investigations. We are not a criminal. We don't have any criminal jurisdiction at the State Ethics Commission. We are an administrative body, and so we can only file administrative charges against people. So we get complaints, and I think I had mentioned we get about 400 complaints in every year. When they come in, we take a look at them to see if they even fall within our jurisdiction or if they're even complaining about someone that we have jurisdiction over. If we determine that there is potential merit to the complaint, we can open it as a preliminary inquiry, and we have 60 days to kind of take a look and see if there's merit to it. If there is, then we can open it into a full investigation. We have 180 days to complete our investigations. We can get a couple of extensions, but we're pretty limited in how quickly we have to finish our investigations. And we only open the cases and the investigations once we know we can get them done within the short time frame. The proceedings and records that we collect, the interviews we do, we keep all of that information absolutely confidential. We don't disclose the identity of a complainant. We get a right to know law request asking about, asking for records relating to an investigation. Our answer is no, and we've never been successfully challenged in that. We take that very seriously because we don't want to discourage people from filing complaints. The only thing that's public is the final order. So after we do an investigation, we issue a charging document. We call it an investigative complaint findings report. And the people who are, we call them the respondents, but they're kind of the defendants in the case, have the right to a confidential hearing. They can actually ask for a public hearing, but they have the right to a hearing. And most of our cases, they'll actually settle. And then the commission has to approve any settlements, or if it goes to a hearing, the commission serves as the judge, and then they issue a final order. Only that final order then becomes a public record, and those are posted to our website. Right. So what kind of penalties can we impose? Like I said, we're an administrative body. We can issue a public order. And I'll tell you what, I think sometimes the biggest penalty for people is the publicity and the public order that results from our investigations. Nobody ever wants to be viewed as unethical. And so I think the public orders in and of themselves can be the most harmful thing for people who end up being subject to them. But the commission can also issue restitution or require restitution be paid, and treble penalties, which is restitution plus 3 times the amount that the public official or public employee received. So those can add up pretty quick. So I said at the beginning, my very first slide, I said, I want to keep you out of jail. And the reason I say that is that even though the commission is not a criminal justice agency, we can't charge someone criminally. We can and we do refer cases to the Attorney General. We also refer cases to the local district attorney's offices, and we can also refer them to the feds. A criminal charge of a violation of the Ethics Act can be a misdemeanor or a felony depending upon the section charged, up to $10,000 fine and up to 5 years in prison. So those can get, they can be very serious, which is why I'm here. I don't ever want to see this happen to any of you. The other penalties that the commission can impose are related to statements of financial interest, and those can be up to $250 per form that is delinquent or deficient. All right, so I'm going to move on to my last substantive slide, and it's actually a story that I want to tell you about what you should not do. All right, so this actually was a case that I handled when I was at the commission before, back from I think this was from like 2008, 2009 timeframe. So I actually handled this case. So there was a woman who worked at the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission, and she was a public employee based upon her job duties. And so she was required to file this form, and she actually had left the PUC, the Public Utility Commission. She had left like sometime in 2008. And it was like 2009 that she still had to file her form, because these forms are kind of like tax returns. So you have to make sure one's on file. So if you serve one day in 2023, you have to file your form by May 1st of 2024, like a tax return. So this was after she had left the PUC, and it came to our attention through, I don't even know how, whether it was a complaint or an audit or who knows. It came to our attention that she was required to file the form, and she did not file her form. And so we reached out to her. We followed our ordinary process that's listed in our law. And we sent her a notice letter. And the letter, hopefully none of you have ever received them. They are a little scary. It says like I think maybe in like all caps, first notice letter. And essentially what they say is, it's come to our attention you were supposed to file this form. You didn't file the form. File it within 20 days and nothing will happen to you. So we give people a chance to fix issues, right? We're really looking for compliance when it comes to these types of forms. So we sent her the letter and she ignored it. So even though we don't have to under the law, we try to be nice. So we sent her a second notice letter. We call it the final notice letter, and we sent it by certified mail, and she signed for it. And that second notice letter said, hey, this is your second and final notice letter, and it came to our attention you didn't file this form. File the form within 20 days and nothing will happen to you. Well, she ignored the second notice letter. So we followed our process, which is that the investigative division of the commission filed what's called a petition for civil penalties. And we asked the commission, the body, to impose a $250 civil penalty against her for not filing her form, which they did. They took a look at the case and they said, you were required to file. You didn't file. You didn't even respond to anything. You have to file you have to file the form, pay the money. So the commission issued the order, and do you think that she complied? The answer is no. And so we exercised our ability to go to Commonwealth Court to enforce the agency order. And the Commonwealth Court imposed $371.06 in court costs. And she also ignored the Commonwealth Court's order. So we went back, and the Commonwealth Court found her in contempt of court, and they issued a warrant for her arrest. And when that was issued, she very quickly filed the form and very quickly paid all the money that was owed. This is the form that she sent in, and we got it in, and we were a little bit shocked, laughed a little bit about it. But we looked at it in detail, and we determined that it was fully compliant with all legal provisions in the Ethics Act. And so we accepted it for filing. But we show this to you guys so you know what not to do. If you get a form from us or a letter from us saying you need to file or you need to fix something on your form, just do it. Probably nothing's going to happen. If you're sitting here right now and said, oh my gosh, I forgot to file my form in the past, just go file it, date it today. Don't try and make it look like it was timely filed, because we update these every year and we'll know. Just go file it. Not a big deal. If you're sitting here and you think, oh my gosh, I didn't disclose this thing I was supposed to file on my form, just fix it and indicate that it was amended and date it today. we really are looking for compliance when it comes to these forms, because the purpose of them is for the public to be able to see where a public official or public employee's potential conflicts might lie. So just get it done and get it done right. But we think this is a priceless story. So that's all I have for you guys today. Let me see where I'm at. Pretty much right on time. We are always trying to do better and be a better resource for all the public officials and public employees in Pennsylvania. And so here is our contact information. We're also trying to be technologically savvy. So we have this QR code that you can snap a photo with your cell phone and it'll take you to a survey where you can give feedback about how I did today, and also give feedback about how we can help you better. Because like I said, we really want to be a resource to you. So thank you so much for having me today. I'm glad the tech all worked out well. Hopefully, if you guys have any questions in the future, give us a call. We're happy to work to talk through it with you. And it was really nice to be here.
Thank you so much, Attorney Fox. We do appreciate the time you gave us this evening. I'm going to open it up to those in the room for any comments or questions before we close the meeting out. I'll start with members of council. I'll start with members of council that are here just to keep it organized a little bit. Councilwoman Laird or Wilhelm, any questions or comments?
I have a quick question.
Ms. Wilhelm?
Thank you so much for the presentation. You had mentioned with regard to abstaining from a vote that we need to publicly announce, but also a written memo.
Yes.
Does that happen in advance of the meeting? Can you just say more about that piece of it, the written memo?
Sure. So I would urge you to actually take a look at that section. It's 1103J of the Ethics Act. It's available on our website. I do believe, I don't have it right in front of me. I'm only working with one screen, but I do believe it gives some time frame where you need to file that in advance of the meeting. Or in advance, maybe it's just in advance of the vote. I think it's in advance of the vote.
Okay. And if there has been a case where we've publicly abstained from a vote, but didn't submit a memo, is that something we can do retroactively?
I would talk to your solicitor about that and see. I'm not sure how all the rules would work with regard to updating the records from a meeting. I don't know the harm. I don't know that there's a harm in doing it retroactively, but always do it going forward. We've seen so many cases where people didn't do that and the meeting minutes weren't clear, and it just ends up being a bit of a mess.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I don't have any questions, but just thank you for the information. As a new first timer in public office, then it's certainly helpful to hear it all.
Great.
Members of council that are virtual, any questions or comments? Mr. Callahan?
I unmute myself. I have a quick question. What if I have a sister or a brother that is bringing something before city council to get approved, and I'm not in favor of it. I'm against it. I think it's bad for the city. Am I allowed to still vote on it?
I would still recommend that you abstain. Remember the elements for a conflict of interest are use of office for a private pecuniary gain. And you're probably not going to have that private pecuniary, you're not going to have that sort of nexus between action and then trying to benefit financially your brother or sister, your immediate family member. But it still is messy. So even though something might not be an ethics violation, it still may be a perception issue that you're involved in something involving a family member. And so I talked to your solicitor, but in a case like that, I don't know that we would have all the necessary nexus between the elements of a conflict of interest.
What if they just worked for the company, and the company's presenting it, and I'm against it, but they don't own the company; they just work for the company.
Right. So if you look at the definition of business with which associated, it includes an employee of a company. So I don't think the analysis would be any different if they're an employee of the company or if it would be a decision to involve them directly. I think you're going to have the same considerations. Like I said, you might not have the nexus between the elements of a conflict of interest that would enable us to do an investigation. But it's still something that, I would probably just stay away from.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. And if you want to talk about that more specifically and further, give us a call. You can ask me.
Yeah, I will. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions from anyone who's virtual? Councilwoman Leone?
Forgive my voice. I had a question about the travel and lodging. One thing I noticed is that sometimes we get invited to conferences that have more to do with training as a public official than anything we would take action on. I've been hesitant to accept anything like that but if we wanted to take part of a conference that's like a nonpartisan local leadership training, and they offer scholarships, is that a gray area? Even if there's no action taken at the local level, it confuses me.
Sure, it is confusing. That's why it confuses you. So who's paying for it?
So one of the ones that I was thinking of, there's a organization called National Alliance for Latino Elected Officials or something like that. So it's they have a scholarship fund that you can take part of. So it's the nonpartisan organization itself that would pay for it if you took part of the scholarship.
Okay, so I would say that the Ethics Act likely would not prohibit you from accepting that. It's going to be I'd imagine it's going to be over the $650 threshold to report on your statement of financial interest. So it would certainly need to be reported on your form. I would caution you that if you were in any position then to take action to benefit that group in your public position, that you abstain from having anything to do with that. I don't know where that might lie. I don't know, that you would even be in a position to benefit that group in your public office. But if you were at that point after accepting that trip, I would err on the side of abstention.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions or comments from members of council who are virtual? Thank you, council members. I'll turn to Mayor Reynolds of the administration.
I'm good.
Thank you. Before I turn it to the public, I'll just again thank Attorney Fox for joining us this evening. Best of luck to your daughter on the track this season.
Thanks.
And I will just share, this is, I don't know, maybe my third or so training that I've been involved in, and we've had Attorney Frankenberger with us previously, and I've reached out to him directly. There have been times it was kind of informal. I just called the office, he and I chatted, ran some things by him just briefly. It wasn't always the most formal, get a written opinion, give it to our solicitor or our clerk. It was things that kind of came across my desk or someone would bring up to me in passing. So I do encourage everyone, and the questions were great here tonight, but it doesn't end tonight. This is just education about what resources are out there for all of us. So thank you again, Attorney Fox, for everything you do.
No, I'm glad to hear that. I'll pass that along to Jeff as well. He'll be glad to hear it too.
Yeah, we appreciate all of you. And then before we go home, I will open it up for public comment. Is there anyone in the center who wanted to make comment? Mr. Antalix?
Stephen Antalix, 77 Ridge. If we take the term ethics in a general way, we can assume a definition that says the moral principles that govern one's personal behavior. If we then take a council member who operates on two levels, personally, as a private citizen, the one behind that desk is a public servant. And if an issue comes up to be voted on where the council member says that their vote is their personal opinion, knowingly that's in conflict with the opinion of the general electorate. So, and they vote against the resolution based upon their personal opinion. knowingly contradicting that of the people who elected that person. So the question is, in a general sense, can this be classified as an ethics problem in addition to a conflict of interest problem?
Mr. Antalix, this is your opportunity to comment to council. We're not going to engage in a question and answer right now.
Well, I have a immediate dial on my phone for the Ethics Commission, and the other question I have to ask is for the slide says final orders of public record. Is that part of the Public Records Department?
Mr. Antalix, again, this is your ability to
But you
comment
can't-
on what you heard
Well, you
tonight.
can't answer my question.
I'm going to restate, this is your opportunity to make comment. We're here to listen before
the
we
point,
adjourn.
I'm gathering from your comments, sir, that you can't answer me, but it's, never mind. I appreciate this catch-22 example.
That concludes public comment this evening. Get home safe, everyone. This meeting is adjourned.
Good night. Thank you, Mary. It was great.
Thank you. Good night. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Mary.